Good morning. It's wonderful to be here in the Octagon with all of you. My name is Phyllis Inman Barnett. My husband Bob and I met in Madeira Beach in the early 1960s. We moved to New York State in 1978, where Bob worked for IBM and I taught high school English. We returned to Florida in 1997 and joined the Unitarian Universalists of Clearwater in 2005. Until 2019, we were snowbirds, living in Florida, but spending 6 months each summer in North Carolina. In a weak moment in July, when Sue Boone asked me to share my story or my journey to Unitarian Universalism, I said sure. But like most of us, my story is complicated, so I decided to focus on my Universalist roots and talk about the small chapel built by my great-great-grandfather in the mountains of North Carolina. My ancestors came to the Carolina Mountains from England, Scotland, and Germany. They brought with them the skills and the tools to survive in the remote wilderness of the Appalachians. They created a homespun world of spinning wheels, water wheels, and church bells. They created mountain communities united in their work ethic, their love of family, and their love of music. Haywood County has been home to both my mother's and father's families since the 17th century. It is a beautiful, fertile county west of Asheville and east of Knoxville, Tennessee. Some of you who have visited the mountain in Highland, North Carolina, or attended Susie in Cullowhee have possibly driven through Haywood County. Coal Mountain is the second highest peak east of the Rockies. And Inman Chapel rests at the base of Coal Mountain. My great-great-grandfather, James Anderson Inman, was born in 1826. He was recognized as a Universalist minister in 1850. The first Universalist church in the Western North Carolina was established right after the Civil War. It met in private homes, schools, and camp meetings until 1902, when Inman, my great-grandfather, along with a few like-minded neighbors, built Inman Chapel. The years between Inman's death in 1913 and the coming of Hannah Powell, a Universalist minister sent by the Women's National Missionary Association to Inman Chapel in 1921, were challenging ones for the survival of Universalism in the mountains. Hannah Powell was an imposing woman who was not easily discouraged by men such as my grandfather, Jose Ballou Inman, men who were critical of a woman pastor. Under Powell's leadership, Inman Chapel was the center of a thriving community and outreach ministry of the Universalist Church until the 1950s. When Ballou Inman died, he left directions that his funeral service was to be conducted by Hannah Powell. Inman Chapel remained in operation until the merger with the Unitarians. At that time, small Universalist church scattered throughout the rural South were closed and sold. Because of provisions in Inman's will and because the land did not belong to the Universalist Association, Inman Chapel was turned over to a board of trustees made up of family members. There was little public or UU interest in Inman Chapel until the publication of Inman's great-great-grandson, Charles Fraser's award-winning novel, Coal Mountain. The book is based on family stories. It's set in the Civil War era. And its protagonist, Inman, has definite Universalist characteristics. Charles Fraser's book won the National Book Award and later became a movie starring Nicole Kidman and Jude Law. And Inman Chapel became the focus of a lot of national attention. In 1997, the same year Charles Fraser's book was published, Bob and I left New York and moved back to Florida and began our lives as snowbirds. We got involved in the restoration of Inman Chapel in 2006. My brother, who had been chairman of the Board of Trustees for 20 years, was in declining health and needed help. The chapel had been constructed of chestnut lumber, and it was deteriorating rapidly. After the Universalists left Inman Chapel, it was used mainly by Protestant groups and for family reunions and funerals. Most of the Inman family in the Pigeon Valley were members of Protestant churches and had little appreciation for the liberal roots of Inman Chapel. The trustees appointed Bob and me as chairs of the Restoration Committee. We had two main goals: to preserve the physical building if possible, and to preserve the Universalist legacy of my great-grandfather. Bob became not only the chief fundraiser, but also the project manager and the major worker on most of the projects. During this time, I talked with family members and neighbors, and many of them shared stories, letters, and most importantly, old photographs. I researched old newspaper articles, and I called Tufts University and Harvard University, where some of the early documents of the Universalists had been donated. I wrote the book, Sunburst and the Universalists at Inman Chapel, to serve as a record of a liberal faith in an unlikely area of our country. Bob wrote the epilogue, detailing the extent of the restoration, and he tells some wonderful, funny stories about my father and brother. We used the book as part of our fundraising activities to restore Inman Chapel. We continue to sell copies of this book to people interested in regional and Universalist history. There's a copy in our library here at UUC and in libraries in Haywood County and in the Unitarian Universalist Archives in Boston. The story of Universalism, Inman Chapel, and the sawmill community at Sunburst is like other stories scattered throughout the rural South. It is the story of family, of community, of change, and the loss of a way of life. Aspects of Inman Chapel's history reminded me of the Unitarian Universalists of Clearwater, which was also surrounded by fundamentalist neighbors, but had survived the turbulent times. The first pivotal moment in my journey toward this community was in 1999 when we came to visit and heard the young minister Abi Janamachi preach. But my first memory of the Octagon is from the 1970s when I was a teacher here in Pinellas County. It was being used as a safe space for Pinellas County teachers to meet during the walkout for better working conditions and improved salaries. I find it helpful to remember what it was like for Unitarian Universalists in Pinellas County during previous decades. Those years were not easy ones. A few years ago, I shared with some of you a memorable book called A Land More Kind Than Home. It was at that time a debut novel by a young Appalachian writer, Wiley Cash. And he used a line from Thomas Wolfe's book, You Can't Go Home Again, as his title. And I thought, that's what UUC and the Octagon are for me. A place more kind than home. Thomas Wolfe's words struck an emotional chord in me. Death is to lose the earth you know for greater knowing, to lose the life you have for greater life, to leave the friends you loved for greater loving, to find a place more kind than home. And as a snowbird who went home every year, I learned the truth at the heart of the title of Wiley Cash's book, that homes change, that families change, and that I had changed. Another key point in my commitment to this UUC community came in 2016 when Bob and I accepted the challenge to chair the fundraising efforts for the Surdy Center. I was enormously impressed, despite the confusions of the time, at how many people gave generously of time and money to make that dream a reality. At each turning point in UUC's history, an ordinary group of individuals moved out of the conventional safety of their lives to undertake difficult tasks. I believe in the power of words, in the power of stories. But I know how often, at crucial times in my life, I've failed to find the right word to communicate what I mean. When I was young, I longed to get things completed. I'd make a list and cross stuff off, to be finished. As a mother of young daughters, I wanted the lessons that I was teaching to be learned in a straight line with a beginning and an end. As a young teacher, I thought what I was covering in the fall would be completed in the spring. Lessons that I learned as a mother and as a classroom teacher were humbling ones and are similar to those that I continue to learn as a Unitarian Universalist, that I am never finished. No matter what I had done the previous week or year, outwitting my 2-year-old to avoid a temper tantrum, having students with exceptional test scores, each day, each fall came with a clean slate, an opportunity to do it all over again. When I first joined UUC, I especially liked that we had a scholar, a teacher, a preacher whose voice and ideas inspired us each Sunday. The covenant groups, facilitated for many years by Joe and Ann Myers, have also been sources of growth and inspiration for me. The past few years have been difficult. Some of us have suffered devastating personal losses. Some of us have suffered the loneliness of isolation, and all of us have suffered the loss of idealism. It is the best of times and the worst of times. We struggle today with the same issues that have been here at UUC since the beginning. We are a melting pot of people drawn here by this and that from other places. We can learn from the past, but there is much ahead that we can't prepare for. But we are challenged by those who have come before us to improve our programs and to preserve and maintain this building as a sacred space for those who will come after us. The challenge for all of us is to accept that we're never done. I know, like me, many of you are looking forward to getting to know our new minister, the Reverend Amy Kindred. The challenge for all of us is to do what has to be done. I want to thank Margie and the worship committee for the opportunity to share part of my story with you today. Thank you.